Creature Preacher here, standing on the edge of the world we know. Most people come to these shores to forget, but the Santa Rosa Sound is a place that remembers. Beneath the emerald shimmer of Destin and the quiet reaches of Mary Esther, there is a pulse, an ancient, rhythmic heartbeat that predates the maps and the military bases. Out here, the wind doesn't just blow, it whispers. The water doesn't just flow, it hides. For the next hour, we're stepping off the beaten path and into the deep history of a land that has been haunted since the first fire was lit on these dunes. From the oily serpent of the deep to the headless sentinels of the bay, come with me as we wake the spirits of the panhandle. Be careful where you step. In a thin place like this, the past is never truly behind us. The shadow souls of the ancient shell people is where we begin. To find the start of the thread of this tapestry, we have to look back farther than the maps go, back to the ancestors of the Calusa and the builders of the Fort Walton culture. These were the shell people of the Panhandle. To them, the oyster shell was not just waste. It was the sacred building block of their world. They constructed the massive mounds at Shell Mound Park and across Mary Esther as more than just platforms. They were spiritual batteries. In the belief system of these ancient maritime people, every human possessed 3 souls, but the most powerful was the shadow soul. They believed that while the body might rot, the shadow remained tethered to the earth, possessing a life and will of its own. In a thin place, like the Santa Rosa Sound, the Calusa believed the water was a mirror to the underworld. They taught that the shadows of the dead would eventually slip into the water, merging together to form something massive and dark. This is the spiritual birth of the shadow within a shadow that boaters still report today. When you see a dark shape gliding beneath the surface, the ancients wouldn't tell you it was a fish. They would tell you it was the collective shadow soul of 1,000 warriors, a sentinel of the deep that refuses to fade. They believed that if you stared too long into the dark water, your own shadow might detach itself and join the silent legion below. This is why the mounds remain active today. They are not graveyards of bone, but storehouses of shadows that still watch the shoreline, guarding the secrets of the shell kings from the modern world. After the Fort Walton culture came the Uchi and Muskogee peoples, who first called this stretch between Mary Esther and Destin home. To them, the land and water were never just scenery. They were a thin veil over a lower world, populated by spirits that demanded caution and respect. At Shell Mound Park, the earth itself holds the old ones. These mounds are not merely historical markers. They are living houses of the spirits. Tradition warns that disturbing this ground releases ancestors who were buried within specific rituals to keep them tethered to the earth. The cold spots and strange mists frequently reported in Mary Esther are said to be these spirits still walking the shoreline, guarding villages that have long since vanished. Deep in the palmettos and scrub oaks near Hurlburt Field, the little people dwell. The Siakani. The Muskogee Creek described them as small humanoid beings, no taller than a child, but with the weathered faces of elders. They possess a physical impossibility. Their feet are pointed backwards. This is a deliberate deception. If you try to follow their tracks to find their hidden villages, you will only lead yourself further into the deepest, most unforgiving parts of the swamp. They are not merely ghosts, but tricksters of the brush. They are blamed for the disappearing sensation people feel in the woods, the sudden suffocating quiet that falls over the forest right before a person loses their sense of direction. Native myths say that if you hear a low whistling in the scrub near Hurlburt or Mary Esther, it is a beckoning you must ignore. You should leave a small gift of tobacco or food on a stump and walk away without looking back, or the Siakani will lead you into the black water sloughs until the earth itself swallows you whole. There are other primordial guardians. Even the sand beneath our feet has a story. The cry of the sand hills tells of a sun daughter who fell in love with a mortal man. When the sea claimed him, her tears bleached the dunes of Okaloosa Island white before she vanished into the hills. The whistling of the wind over the dunes is said to be her voice, and she is not alone. For decades, residents have seen ghost wolves, large, silvery white canines that lope across the sand without leaving a single paw print. These are the hounds of the Sound, ancient protectors with glowing amber eyes that appear only to warn of an impending catastrophic hurricane. These wolves guard the coast against the Mishapishu, or the underwater panther. The Uchi spoke of this feline-headed serpent with copper scales and horns that lived in the deep whirlpools of the Destin Pass. It controlled the currents and demanded sacrifice. It is the original oily serpent, a slick-skinned entity that left her film on the water and could swallow a dugout canoe whole. Then came the time of the Spanish shadow. 1559 through 1763. As we move from the age of the Fisher Kings to the year of 1559, it marks a violent shift in the timeline of the Sound. This was the year Don Tristan de Luno de Arano arrived with 11 ships and 1,500 souls, aiming to establish the first permanent European settlement in North America, right here in our backyard. They called it Santa Maria de Oxus, but the land did not welcome them. Just weeks after their arrival, a hurricane, called the Great Killing Wind of the Ancients, roared out of the Gulf, smashing the Spanish fleet against the seabed. Hundreds of Spanish sailors were dragged down into the dark water, their armored bodies becoming part of the oily deep. Archaeologists are still uncovering these ships today, but the locals will tell you that the Spanish left more than just artifacts. They left a legacy of ghosts. The Spanish brought a different kind of spiritual weight to the Sound, the weight of gold and the weight of the cross. They encountered the Calusa and the Muskogee, and for 200 years the Panhandle became a battlefield of souls. The Spanish missions were built to tether the old ones to a new god, but the land itself resisted. By 1763, between European disease and brutal warfare, the tribes were decimated. The ancient shadow souls of the Calusa were joined by the restless spirits of drowned conquistadors, forever anchored to the floor of the Sound. This is the era where a lady in white begins to haunt the periphery. While some say she is a pioneer, older legends tell of a high-born Spanish maiden lost during a later naval disaster. Her flickering lantern isn't just a searchlight. It's a 500-year-old signal fighter eternally burning in the thin air between the dunes and the deep, searching for an empire that the Florida Sand refused to let take root. Which leads us to the time of the British frontier and the era of outlaws, 1763 to 1783. By 1763, the cross and the galleon gave way to the English crown. In a massive trade of empires, the Spanish sailed away, leaving their drowned sailors and buried secrets to the British. For 20 years, the Santa Rosa Sound was a frontier of shadows, a British West Florida, where the law stopped at the water's edge. This was the era of a woodsman and the trapper, men who walked the Mary Esther scrub and felt the eyes of the old ones on their backs. The English tried to map this land, to categorize it, and then tame it, but you cannot map a thin place. They brought their own spiritual weight, the restless ghost of redcoats and revolutionaries who died in the humid heat of the swamps, far from the cold stones of London. This British era turned the Panhandle into a lawless no-man's land. Because the English were stretched thin, the Sound became a sanctuary for the desperate, runaway slaves, displaced tribes, and British loyalists fleeing the American Revolution to the north. It was this very lawlessness that invited the vultures in. The British period stripped away the last of the colonial order, turning a sanctuary of spirits into a harbor for the most bloodthirsty men to ever sail the Gulf. As the English influence faded, the vacuum was filled by the black flags of the privateers, leading us directly into the blood-soaked legend of the headless rowers. By the mid-1800s, Mary Esther was a rugged wilderness. This era gave us another lady in white. She was a woman who walked the shoreline with a lantern, waiting for a husband who never returned from the sea. During a massive storm that shifted the very sandbars of the Sound, she was swept away. Now, the ghost lights, seen flickering over the water, are said to be her lantern, followed by strange disturbances in the water, the spirit of things she had witnessed beneath the waves during her eternal search. In 1882, before Destin was a tourist hub, it was a rugged fishing village. Schooner captains entering the Destin Pass began reporting an entity they called the Leviathan. It was described as much larger than any known whale or shark, a massive dark ribbon that moved with vertical undulations. Unlike a whale, it never surfaced to blow. It simply glided through the pass, a shadow within a shadow, signaling that the oily serpent of the ancients was very much alive. The spirits of this coast are often stirred by the weather. In 1906, a devastating hurricane tore through the Panhandle, shifting the landscape and unearthing a cache of Spanish gold coins on Santa Rosa Island, directly opposite Mary Esther. While the discovery brought fortune to some, it brought a renewed darkness to the sound. Locals believed that when the gold was moved, it broke a seal. It was shortly after this storm that reports of the headless rowers and the Lady in White became more frequent and more aggressive, as if the unearthing of the pirate bounty had awakened the sentinels condemned to guard it. The sightings continued into the 20th century. In 1921, Mr. Lee Jernigan provided one of the most chilling reports in Florida history. While drifting up the Santa Rosa Sound near Pirates Cove, a small yawl emerged from the fog and rowed alongside them. Jernigan was below deck, but three of his men watched for several minutes as a crew of headless men rowed in perfect, silent rhythm. The boat vanished just like a flash, and the witnesses were so shaken when they took an oath on the Bible to swear what they had seen was the truth. In the summer of 1929, W.B. Lee Miller had his own brush with the deep. Navigating a small skiff near Mary Esther on a day when the water was as slick as glass, he saw a dark, 40-foot wake moving against the tide as it passed beneath him. He realized it was a single, continuous entity. It was oily, smoothing the water's surface as it traveled with a slow, vertical undulation. When he poked his oar into the water, he described the sensation as scraping a wet inner tube. There was no splashing, no breath, only a massive, silent shadow that swallowed the light. This era of monsters culminated in the 1962 Pensacola sea serpent encounter. Edward Brian McCleary and four friends were swept towards the Gulf near the wreck of the USS Massachusetts. McCleary, the sole survivor, described a creature with a 10-foot neck, skin like weathered boot, and glowing eyes emerging from the sulfuric mist to pull his friends underwater one by one. He never recanted his story, claiming the creature made a distinct hissing sound as it surfaced. And more modern mysteries, 1987 until the present. In the late 20th century, the hauntings moved to the sky. The area surrounding Hurlburt Field, Herbie, and England became a global hotspot for UAPs. The 1987 Gulf Breeze sightings brought hundreds of reports of orange-red lights and silent metallic craft. Witnesses even spoke of a blue beam that could immobilize people, a story that still haunts local coffee shops. To this day, residents see large, silent triangular craft with red lights at the corners drifting over the trees of Mary Esther. While some point to military testing, the way these crafts drift suggests something not entirely man-made. This was reinforced in January 20 and 23, when an Air Force pilot out of England reported a radar lock on four objects, including one shaped like an Apollo capsule with a gunmetal gray top and a glowing orange bottom. It floated at 16,000 feet without wings or engines, a modern ghost in an ancient sky. The emerald waters are beautiful, yes, the white sands inviting. But as the sun dips below the horizon and the fog rolls in over Mary Esther, remember that you are standing on a threshold. The thin place doesn't care if you believe in it, only cares that you are there to witness it. The headless men are still rowing, the white wolves are still watching, and the oily shadow is still gliding beneath the keel of the next boat. I've told you the stories, and now I have to ask, do you have the courage to see it for yourself? Next time the moon is dark and the sound is still, come down to the water's edge. Take a walk on the thin side if you dare. This has been the Creature Preacher. Keep your eyes on those shadows.